Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to read a long poem in memory of W.B. Yeats by W.H. Auden. It is a long poem. Before start the poem, we are going to read about W.H. Auden. Western Hughes Auden. He was born 1907 and died in 1973. Was an Anglo-American poet. Auden's poetry was noted for its stylistic and technical achievement, its engagement with politics, morals, love and religion, and its variety in tone, form, and content. Some of his best known poems are about love, such as Funeral Blues. ये इसकी फेमस पोइम है डब्ल्यू एच ओडन की फ्यूनरल ब्लूज on political and social themes such as September 1st, 1939, and The Shield of Achilles, on cultural and psychological themes such as the age of anxiety, and on religious themes such as for the times being and Horace Canonicals. मतलब ये जो फ्यूनरस ब्लूज और शील्ड ऑफ एचिल्स इसकी फेमस है और द एज ऑफ एंजाइटी ये भी इसकी बहुत फेमस पोइम है. He won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for his 1947 long poem The Age of Anxiety. एज ऑफ एंजाइटी जो लॉन्ग पोइम है इसके लिए पुलित्जर प्राइज मिला डब्ल्यू एच ओडन को. द टाइटल ऑफ विच बिकेम अ पॉपुलर फ्रेज डिस्क्राइबिंग द मॉडर्न एरा. जो इसका टाइटल है एज ऑफ एंजाइटी का बाद में मॉडर्न जो टाइम है उसको डिस्क्राइब करने के लिए इस टाइटल को यूज किया जाने लगा. डब्ल्यू एच ओडन का पूरा नाम वेस्टर्न ह्यूज ओडन है. In memory of W. Yeats, Auden taps into themes of life after death, the power of poetry, and the human condition. The, the powerful and wide ranging themes are discussed within the context of Yeats' life and death. Auden uses an exacting tone and direct language to depict the events around Yeats' death. The mood is at times uplifting and at others concerning and varying. There are many dark images and many fewer hopeful ones. In memory of W. Yeats is a complex look at Yeats' life, death, and the power or lack thereof that poetry has to change the world. The first part of the poem addresses the last days of Yeats' life and what is was like right after he died. Auden speaks on the loss and how it impacted and did not impact the world. The second section of In Memory of W. A. Yeats is directed through a second person speaker to Yeats himself, while the third is an elegy meant to sum up that which was spoken about previously, but also make new statements about what poetry can do for humankind, especially in the face of World War II. You can read the full poem. Hey. Structure of the poem. The poem is a three-part is a three-part poem that is further divided into stanzas of different lengths. मतलब जो पूरी पोइम है तीन पार्ट्स में डिवाइड की गई है और हर पार्ट को स्टेंजाज में डिवाइड किया गया है. द फर्स्ट पार्ट ऑफ द पोइम कंटेन्स 6 स्टेंजाज. पहले पार्ट में 6 स्टेंजा है. द सेकंड वन एंड थर्ड 6 अगेन और सेकंड और थर्ड में 6 है. Auden does not make use of a rhyme scheme in the first two parts of the poem, but in the third he does. फर्स्ट और सेकंड पार्ट में वो है कोई राइम स्कीम नहीं है, लेकिन थर्ड जो पार्ट है 6 लाइन्स का उसमें राइम स्कीम है. दिस मेक्स सेंस considering the elegiac form of these last lines. They rhyme in a pattern of A, B, C, C, D, D, and so on, changing and sounds as he show fit. Rhyme scheme हमने लगाना देख रखे हैं already. Odin had a different goal in mind with each section. The first image is what it was like when Yeats was dying. जो फर्स्ट जो पार्ट है पोइट्री का उसमें जब येट्स की डेथ हो रही थी उसका है. द सेकंड इज एड्रेस टू द पोइट हिमसेल्फ. जो सेकंड पार्ट है पोइट्री का वो पोइट को खुद के लिए संबोधन है, कहीं ना कहीं एड्रेस कर रहा है. एंड द थर्ड इज मच मोर ट्रेडिशनल एलिजी. और जो थर्ड है वह एक तरह से एलिजी है उसकी डेथ में. Poetic technique in Odin makes use of several poetic techniques in this poem, like enjambment, allusion, and alliteration. An alliteration is an expression that is mean to call something special to mean mind without directly stating it. In the second part of the poem, Auden alludes to some of Yeats' other works, especially those focused on the Irish independence movement and the Irish nationalist at the heart of it. The final section allowed to the tragedies of the Second World War that was brewing in 1939 when Yeats died. Alliteration occurs when words are used in succession or at least appear closer together and begin with the same sound. For example, dying day in the fourth line of the first stanza in section 1, or silence and suburb in stanza 3 of the same section. Another important technique commonly used in poetry is enjambment. It occurs when a line is cut off before its natural stopping point. जब कोई लाइन जहाँ से रुकनी होती है उसको नेचुरली जहाँ रुकना होता है उससे पहले ही अगर उसको कट ऑफ कर दिया जाता है तो ये इंजाममेंट कहलाता है. इंजाममेंट फोर्सेस अ रीडर डाउन टू द नेक्स्ट लाइन एंड द नेक्स्ट क्विकली. One has to move forward in order to comfortably resolve a phrase or sentence. The transition between line 3 and 4 in the first stanza of section 3, or that between lines 1 and 2 of stanza 3 of that same section. और जो फर्स्ट स्टेंजा पार्ट 1 का जो फर्स्ट स्टेंजा है वो है he disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. What instruments we have agreed the day of his death was a dark cold day. इसका जो फर्स्ट स्टेंजा का फर्स्ट पार्ट का जो स्टेंजा 1 है इसमें है कि इन द फर्स्ट स्टेंजा द स्पीकर बिगिंस बाय रेफरिंग टू येट्स एज हैविंग हैड डिसअपीयर्ड इन द डेड ऑफ विंटर. That of death here, especially death in winter, should not be ignored, as one would expect everything in winter is frozen, dead, and deserted. The scene the speaker describes his Seligman. The snow disfigured the public statues by starting the poem off with this called death atmosphere. Order is setting the scene to speak about Yeats' own death. In stanza 2, the speaker describes how, despite the death of this great man, things go on. The, the halls are still running through the forest, and the Pigeons River is untempted by the more fashionable quays. By speaking about nature in this way, personifying its descriptions, he is allowed to the human reaction to the poet's death. It is clear form. The emphasis placed on the continuation of normal day to day life that the speaker is bothered by it. The final two lines of the stranger suggest that when readers encounter his poem, his death will not weigh on their minds. It was kept from his poetry. They continues on just as people do, unchanged by the death. The poems last past his death as any writer would want. Far from his illness, the whole ran on through the evergreen forest. The pigeon's river was untempted by the fashionable queries, by mourning tongues. The death of the poet was kept from his poems. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself, as afternoon of nurses and rumors. The provinces of his body revolted, of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. The third stanza, the reader a very human picture presents a very human picture of Yeats' death. His last moment were spent around nurses in the hospital. In the next lines, he depicts Yeats' body at war was with itself. His body revolted against itself, and the squirrels of his mind were empty. There was nothing but silence in the soul. These human built images are juxtaposed against the more natural imaginary in the previous stanzas. The last line he returns to the image of water that he touched on earlier in the poem. He adds that the poet became his admirer, his memory lived on in those who loved his written works. In fourth stanza, he describes how Yeats' soul and essence are scattered among 100 cities. Among all his admirers, he is still living in a way, but has no control over how he is perceived. He is in the guts of living, where his words are modified. This way of being is different, strange, and unfamiliar to the poet. By speaking about Yeats in the present tense in this stanza, Auden emphasizes the theme of life after death. Now he is scattered among 100 cities and wholly given over unfamiliar affections to find his happiness in another kind of wood and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of life of the living, but in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like weeds on the floors of bars, and the poor have the suffering to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the sale of himself is almost conceived of his freedom. A few thousand will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. What instruments we have agree the day of his death was dark, cold day. Auden speaks on how the human world is going on without pause. He uses a smile to describe how the brokers are roaring like beats on the boards or the Paris version of Wall Street. He also described the poor as back to normal as well. They suffer as they always do. This is an unhappy image of the world that is only expanded in the next lines as he speaks more broadly about humankind. He says that all are in the sale of himself, where they are conceived almost of their own freedom. Yet death is only one more moment of unpleasantness in the world. It passes just like everything else does. In last six stanza of this part, they are a repetition of the two lines at the end of the first stanza, re-emphasizing the need for different instruments to measure the poet's death. Humans are unable to adequately measure the day or any day. This speaks to natural's ability to move on without fully comprehending something that is happened. This is how Auden feels about the passing of Yeats' death day. This is the. It was the first part of this poem.